All right. And it says we're live, so I'm going to trust that it's telling me the truth. We've got a really interesting episode for the podcast Lead with Data. I've got my first guest here as part of a live stream, Charles Elwood of Solismatica. Hey, Charles.
Hey, Andrew.
And yeah, we're doing a podcast episode a little bit different than normal. We're capturing it live on video on LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube. So what we're really hoping is that this could turn into a very interactive podcast. So feel free to send in questions, comments, and whatever, and we'll get that integrated right into the show. So anyway, Charles, really excited to have you on this podcast. We're
Yeah,
talking about data and data projects and how you can be more successful with them. And Charles has a whole depth of experience that I'll let him give you a little introduction to himself.
yeah. All right. So what? I've been doing this a year. The date, or no, actually 3 years, 2.5 years. I was inside a company and I discovered Power BI. And Power BI is kind of like the gateway to all the other stuff, and that's how I got connected with you, right? So I was doing Power BI within the company, and it just every single department I kind of talked to about data and Power BI, their eyes lit up. It's like, here's our data. Please go analyze this for us so we can like do a better job, right? And I was like, man, this is crazy. This is a super powerful stuff, right? So a year into it, I was like, the world needs this, not just this company, but the world needs it. So I started my own company, right? And this is a story for those of you out there. Like, is it possible? One of the things was, I was deathly afraid of starting a company and like falling flat and being like, oh, there's no customers, right? But there's customers out there for data, for productivity, for efficiency. That people are struggling with this information overload. So I took a look at my funds and just let everyone know, like, I was profitable within like 4 months, right? So
That's awesome.
yeah, like a year later, I mean, COVID hit me, but it came back. Now it's coming back, and you see people like getting into it, right? So, is it possible? I think, yeah, for me, it has been, right? And I hope in this podcast we talk a little bit about that too, and help people overcome some of the fears. Is like, we're in this data revolution now, and we're still early in it, I believe, right? You and I think have talked about it. Like, we're early, and you can get in now, and before everybody gets in, and you can make an impact pretty quickly with some of the stuff you're doing, like with Python, with AI, BI. I'm bridging. I'm kind of a little more in the visualization layer, data modeling after you've done all your AI stuff to it. There's different sectors and different markets, but boy, this is a long introduction. But I'm going to stop it there, and then that way you can jump in too. So maybe, yeah. So
yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah, I mean, that's one of the really cool things about being in this sort of data profession, whether it's on the analytics and visualization side or AI and machine learning. There's just so many companies out there that have these like treasure troves of data,
Yeah.
and they're wondering, how do I leverage this? What sort of skill sets do I need? And what is that first step? How do I become more successful with this? And I don't know about you, Charles, but a lot of the companies that I talk to, there's just stagnant data. Like, they're collecting it
Yeah.
every
Yep.
single day, and it's piling up, and it almost gets like overwhelming how much they have, to a point where it's like, is all of this useful? Have
Yeah.
you seen that sort of stuff in the companies that you've been working with?
All the time, especially the ones. So the IoT revolution, right? You got this
Yep.
mini computer, Arduino, Raspberry Pi, or whatever, free scale, whatever chip. And man, this thing, they're like, ooh, this thing can pump out data every 5 seconds. We got this amazing tool. We'll stick it on this meter, or, in this museum, or wherever, and boom. And then they're like, well, we got to collect all this data. Let's just collect it, because we bought this device and it just pumps out data. So then they just collect this data, and then, 5 years down the road, they're like, wow, this is data set's getting pretty big. Let's buy more memory. let's buy more hard drives and server space and just store this data because we don't know what to do with it yet, right? So then you get even more data, and then they're buying and they're paying all this money, but the insights aren't coming out of it, right? And I think we're getting to a point now where the people are reaching out to me. It's like, Charles, we have all this data, and we've been collecting it every like 5-10 seconds, whatever. We have oodles of data, and we don't know what it means. Right. So this happens like every other conversation. So there's people that takes the smaller data sets, and they're like the financials and there's operations data that's kind of like a daily, or you it's not as big, right? But you get a lot of companies that automate this with a data logger or an IoT device, and they're sitting on oodles of data they don't know what to do with. So yeah, lots of that going on, and I love it, right? Because I can say to them, it's like, oh, you have oodles of data? Well, just give me like a little snippet of the data. And then we'll talk about this too. It's like, just give me maybe the first 10 lines, 10 rows.
Right.
Show me what all the fields are, right? And I take that and do just analysis on those 10 fields, and I can build a data model for them, which then can scale with their bigger data sets. So once I do that, they're like, because people are thinking macro. They're thinking, I have 5 million rows. I don't know what to do with this. But it's really just, what are the fields? What's the data structure? What's the data tables? What's the lookup tables? And with just a few lines of data, I can probably give them like 70% of the insights. And then once we've built that out, we can scale it to the whole data set, right? So I've seen that a lot. But
yeah, it's that initial structuring of it, right? Like taking this massive repository of just dumped data, however it seemed best to collect it, whether it was trying to maximize how much you're getting out, or maximizing the resolution of it or whatnot, but saying, okay, if I'm getting data coming in from the financials from this way, and accounting coming in from this way, and marketing coming in from that way, if you're looking at business sort of data, like even just matching up columns where different departments, different silos have their own data, their own way of representing it, their own column names for things. People looking at spreadsheets, you can pretty quickly figure out when somebody has a name column, that's a customer client's name or something of that nature. But whether it's first name only, last name only, whole name, or some other combination of that stuff, that all has to get rectified when you want to bring these things together into a visualization, especially when you want to like dedupe the data as well, right? So you use a tool called Power BI to do that most often, right? I'm not sure if everybody's familiar with what Power BI can do for their business. So would you mind giving just kind of like a quick little intro into the ways that you typically use it?
So there's a way I use it, and then I'll talk a little bit about the way the start from scratch. How do you get a quick win for some of the audience members? Right? So I use it, and then I import the data. And what Microsoft has done is they just said, this is not true of all their products, right? Microsoft being Microsoft is like, use Internet Explorer or use, Microsoft this, and we won't play well with anybody else. But for Power BI, they just built out all these connectors. So, when you're like, well, can I connect to Google Sheets? There's actually a way to say, okay, bring in the Google Sheets, and you got to do a little bit of editing. Then it brings it into the table format. So you got your rows and columns, and it looks the same. So then you're like, well, I want to merge this with a SQL server. So you connect to the SQL server, and it brings it in the same, like it shapes it. Everything looks the same, right? So then you're like, oh, wow, now everything looks the same coming from like Salesforce or all these databases. Then you can connect them. And then you do some cleaning and kind of shaping of the model into a star schema. And then, Power BI, you can like drag and drop the fields at that point. Like, I just want the average, and put visuals up. So those are called implicit measures, and which is great for beginners, right? If you just want to see if Power BI will work, you just drag and drop at this point, and you get these visualizations, and you can make decisions right away. I mean, almost instantaneously with this stuff. So that's Power BI. And then I write DAX so DAX is the language behind the scenes that kind of aggregates the data and then kind of sums it up, and then you can do year over year and some time intelligence, right? So that's how I do it. But if I was starting from scratch, I remember, so the reason that how I got into it was a guy from Microsoft was doing a presentation on Azure and IoT, and I went to Grand Rapids with the Lakeshore Makers, and I sat down, and in the middle of his presentation, he's like, guys, this is like 4 years ago when Power BI first came out. It's like, there's a tool called Power BI out there. Download it, go home, go onto Wikipedia and search for a table, and then connect that table to Power BI, and then just start playing with the data, and you'll get insights instantaneously, right? And I was like,
What?
what? No way, right? And I kind of sat on it, and then, you know, I think it was like 3 months later, I was like, man, what was that guy talking about? Microsoft Power BI, and it's a Microsoft product too, and it's free. The desktop is free, right? So I download it. I went to Wikipedia, and I think it was U.S. population by state or something, and I just connected to, and it scraped the data. You can do some rudimentary scraping too. Pull the data in, drag, you know, state, population, and then the visualizations just form. And then you can click on the visualization and say, well, I want this as a bar chart. Then I want it to be a heat map. And you click on, and boom, boom, boom. It just, the insights are there, right? So that's Power BI. That's how I use it. And that's how somebody in the audience can you know, go to and download it and start using it right away.
Yeah. So when you first described Power BI to me,
Yeah.
I originally thought of it as like a supercharged Excel, because a lot of people in business have their own like custom tools and tracking that they make in this universal language of Excel that you just kind of pick up as soon as you get into the workforce.
Yeah.
But there's a lot more to it in that you can connect and keep data refreshing at high rates from your other databases and pulling that all into a unique view.
Right.
So for people who are like getting into Power BI, how much of a sort of concept shift is this, where they have to change their mindset and how they work with their data if they want to switch from Excel to Power BI, or is it really just like an add-on?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's kind of untraining you have to do, right? And here's untraining your brain. So I'll walk through my background a little bit and why it was easier for me to shift, I think, because I was also an Excel person. I did the VLOOKUPs. I did the if statements, you know, the nested if statements. And then I did, you know, copy and paste into a tab. And then another tab takes that data and does the pivot table and the pivot chart, right? And then when something broke, trying to go through that if statement is like, what cell reference is this going to, you know? And you're like, why is this so hard? Here's a little secret. A lot of the new versions of Excel have Power BI built into it, into the back end. So if you click, I think, and they call it something different. It's like data model or Power Query. So there's a button inside of the data ribbon in Excel that takes you into Power BI.
Really?
So it's actually included in Excel, which freaks a lot of people out. So the easy part about if you're from Excel, a lot of the commands in Power Query are the same as the functions and commands in Excel. So like the if statements, the, you know, date, from, left, trim, all those functions are basically the same. So that's an easy transition. Is if you worked with VBA or some of the functions, you're like, oh, I know all these functions. The shift is instead of a flat table, so Excel everything is flat. If you really want to use Power BI, you got to build it into a star schema where data flows from the lookup tables and filters into the data tables. And that's probably where the unlearning comes. And the reason my background's a little bit different, because I took some IT courses, you know, this is 15, 20 years ago, but I learned about SQL queries, normalization, Snowflake, how a Snowflake relational database was built. And I understood how to take a relational database and bring it into a smaller form, a star schema, where there's only one layer. And I just want to talk about this too, is you and I talked about it, but like that's so much easier for people to conceptualize than a full normalized snowflake schema in a relational database. Because people can say, oh, the timestamps are in the data table, and then the lookup, which is who did that process, that's in the client or the person table, the lookup table. So that will filter down in the data table, right? When you talk in a star schema and one layer, it's so much easier to conceptualize. And Andrew, I just one more point.
Go, keep
So,
going.
yeah. So
It's good stuff.
what I'm finding is, so I go in and talk about star schemas and how to break down these relational tables, and it's bringing like IT departments and business groups, like departments together. It's bridging the gap, because before IT was like, well, we need a Snowflake and we need an on-prem SQL server and we need to write these SQL queries. But now you're like, oh, well, the business person is like, well, I've got the dates and I want to know how long it takes for this process. And I want to know who was, the person that was responsible for this process and which department it happened in, right? So now you're talking in the star schema language, is query the data table for these two time differences and filter it by this lookup table or this filter table, right?
Yeah.
So it's what I find phenomenal is we're coming to a time where this tool is bridging the gap between IT and business departments and reducing the time it takes to get to the decisions. So I had to add that last point.
Because each of these silos, what business doesn't have some level of siloing of their data and their processes?
Right.
This star schema approach using Power BI almost forms like this common language once you get that data model put together, right? And so then once that friction's removed, you're able to more quickly understand the domain knowledge of these other silos that you're in. And that's one of the things that I see a lot in machine learning and AI as well, is that the tools that we're using as data professionals are applicable to so many different industries. But the real challenge of taking the technology and the data and making it useful is working with the people in each of these silos and getting a common understanding of not only what does the data mean, but what could it be used for? What do you mean when you say this? Is this useful information? Is the quality of it good? And just having those conversations about simple, small subsets of their data can connect up so much knowledge across the organization, which, just bringing that domain knowledge together is honestly one of the best things a company can do at the beginning of all these data projects, is just get those interdisciplinary departments or silos or people, no matter what your size is, together and start looking at your data and asking some questions about what's really in there.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a true statement, and then it's a common language. It also helps the IT side. So I talked about the business side, learning to speak, IT language, but the IT side also starts to see how their queries and how their output is impacting the business side, because you're understanding that language, the lookup table. We need to know which client is costing us money. It's questions like that, right? And then the IT side now is like, oh, that's why they want that query. And so I'll write it this way. Or they can come up with more insights like, oh, I could write the query like this and give more insight, more value than they were asking for originally. So you take it a step further, and the whole company then, and we have talked about this too, you're on the same tribe, you're speaking the same language, and you're marching in the same direction, which is get to business decisions which help our company grow and get better, versus I'm just writing a SQL query and then I'm going to throw it over the wall, and then they're going to write this and be like, why did this take so long? I already made this decision. Right? Then you're not really on the same path. So
yeah. And there's so many outcomes of data projects that I've seen where it starts off as like, hey, we have this data. We would like to be able to forecast next month's sales using our historical data, right? And it seems pretty straightforward. We give you the data, you train up some models, you start giving us forecasts, everything's great. Once you start diving into a company's data, you start finding that there's a whole bunch of assumptions tied up in how it's collected, how it was processed, how it was stored. There's duplication. There's all of these things that make that data messy and tough to work with,
Yeah.
that like just going through the process of trying to hit that end goal of making predictive sales has all of these extra outcomes that are very positive, of like cleaning up operational processes and how you get data in, and building that common language where people go, oh, when you say you want to forecast next month's sales, it's because we're trying to interact with our clients in a certain way, and being able to give them that data is actually enabling us to give them insight into X action or whatever, right? Like a lot of
Yeah.
times the goal that you start off with the data project isn't even the most valuable thing that comes out of it.
Yeah. It's, that I've got a good story on that one, because
Yeah, please.
yeah, you start digging into the data and you find so many gaps or things you can measure. So we had a process that we were studying and measuring, and it was, I think it was when we got payments on shipments, right? So we would ship. Uh,
Yeah, it's not a question, but
okay. Yeah,
somebody in my network, he
yeah.
did submit a question. I don't
Yeah.
want to interrupt you, but I'm wondering if you have a story on this side too. Mergers and acquisitions interrupting active, and I'm assuming by DW he means data warehouse
Yeah.
projects, which I can see how that could be quite disruptive, especially as we're talking about domain knowledge in silos. A merger and acquisition is probably the most large silo problem you can have, where
Yeah.
everybody's speaking a totally different language in different project processes, and now you got to somehow bring all your data together too while you're in the
Yeah.
middle of organizing it. Is it a
Yeah.
better time to be doing that, or is it a worse time? Should you try to integrate them separately and then bring them together? I don't know. Have
Yeah.
you been part of any merger and acquisition stuff while you're working on data, Charles?
Um, not. I've seen some projects get derailed, and maybe I can talk about that.
Yeah.
But so let me go back to my train of thought, and then we'll
Yeah,
bring.
sorry.
So thank you, Nick, for that question.
Yes.
But we were studying payments for shipments, which is a common thing. I've seen this in multiple companies, right? And it was really interesting because we were looking at the data and we're like, wow, we haven't invoiced these these shipments. And we looked at the data and it was like, wow, they were shipped. We got a record finally that they were shipped, let's say like 6 months ago. I was like, that's interesting. They're shipped 6 months ago and they haven't been invoiced yet. So we started studying the process and we found out that, it was triggered on the paperwork. So if the paperwork wasn't submitted through the right process, it wasn't tagged for invoicing. So then we looked at, well, it's like, who is the person that puts it on the truck, right? And okay, how do they notify anybody that it's shipped? And how do we find that in the database? And there wasn't a tag for that, right? So we added a tag. So we went to that person and say, hey, okay, you go in, you enter in this field the date that it gets shipped. We'll reconcile that with the invoices that go out, and now we have a tag. It's like, okay, now we can start dating this and see which ones haven't been invoiced and go and clean this out. So instead of relying on the paper process where the piece of paper can like sprout legs and then walk off and
Yeah, end up in the shredder somewhere.
Yeah. Who knows where those things end up, right? That's what we discovered. They were sprouting legs. They were walking away. But when we added the tag, you couldn't do that anymore. Those pieces of paper became irrelevant. So we said, paper, you're not the driver of the invoice to get the money in, and we got money in faster, right? So that's an interesting one where we started down this path of just seeing that we were getting money and when it was coming in, but we discovered a gap in the process, which added more value to the company than the actual outcome of just studying,
what they were going for originally.
Yeah,
right?
what they were going for. So it was a beautiful thing in that, just the study of data, you release these patterns that weren't known before. Nobody knew that the paper had walked off, right? So, but now we could see them very clearly. Wow, every month we were having this many that was delayed this long. This is probably because that piece of paper walked off. So I want to go to the next question real quick. If I can, interrupting active data warehouse projects, right? So just a quick story about this one. So
Yeah.
I spent a lot of time mapping out a large database with a lot of tables. I remember, it was basically kind of almost a bomb, like a feature list, right, of
Mm.
a product line for these products. There's product line, and then we had all the different components, and we had configuration. It was a massive configuration database, and I probably had 30 tables, right? But one of the challenges is you have to input the data.
Yeah.
so so built out this infrastructure, which was beautiful because you could query across all your products, like how many products have, this, button on the side or whatever, or camera, and boom, it just spits out a list. It's like, okay, this is how many times we've sent one with a camera. But the data input was, somebody had to sit there and take the sales sheets and enter all the data. And so what happened was people didn't like that. It was like, well, this needs to be automated. I was like, okay, that's kind of a big task to automate data entry. And right now it's manual, but if we just keep populating this, you get a lot of value out of this database. But nobody wanted to do the data entry. So the project was killed, right? And then
Yeah.
what was lost was we had this infrastructure organization on the configuration of products, but it was derailed because there's certain components which humans don't like to do, and which is one of which is data entry. If you could
Yeah.
automate it, and then there's a cost to automation.
Yeah.
So I think they were like, well, just automate it. I was like, okay, that's a big monumental, very costly thing over many months. But we have this data infrastructure. If we just manually put it in for a while, we'll get the insights we need. The value is going to be there. But because there was such a drive to automate it, they actually went to say, okay, no more data entry, and the project was killed. And even though we had this awesome infrastructure, right? So,
Man.
so
Yeah.
that's just a story about derailing data. Once you've got the infrastructure built, don't kill it, because there's still value in that infrastructure.
Yeah, there's value that was unexpected. Like there's often value that's unexpected that comes out of these data projects. And like what you just highlighted, there's so many different things that can happen along the way, since this is such an integrated project across the company that can cause it
Yeah,
to fail. And just knowing all of those different touch points and why those are important can make you a whole lot more successful in a data project. So the
yeah,
specific thing that you said, data entry, not only is that like a real pain to be the person who has to manually enter in data. I don't know about you, but most manual data entry that I've used has terrible user experience,
yeah, yeah.
right?
True,
And
very
if you're
true.
just doing that for 8 hours a day or whatever, it's not just that it's going to be hard to convince somebody to do that, but even if you do, it might not be done well, no fault of their own. The
Right,
UX is bad, and it's just an error prone process.
right.
And if your data at the beginning stages looks bad, in that entered incorrectly or whatever, pretty much everything else down the pipeline doesn't really matter, right?
Yeah,
So, in a whole pipeline of using data from entry to insight, the earlier you are in that pipeline, the more you have to spend effort in making sure that you're not shooting yourself in the foot down the pipeline. But unfortunately, all the fun stuff happens at the end of the pipeline, right? Like
yeah,
here's your forecast, and like here's the thing you were looking for.
yeah,
But usually by the time you get to that point, you've already found many other valuable things to your process and to your products, and just
right.
other revenue generating ideas, perhaps. So spending more of those resources looking at the earlier stages of the pipeline, and I think being open to letting that project diverge, which is always a scary thing for project managers to hear. Like,
Yeah,
I'm hearing scope creep, right?
yeah.
And so have you come across a certain project where, like, as you're going along, you're finding these other opportunities to make good use of the data, and there's almost this confusion as to, like, should we continue going down the path we originally set out? Because, like, that's important, but there's also this, and we don't want to just keep ballooning this thing until before you know it, we've got Charles working 80 hours a week,
Yeah.
trying to do anything and everything.
I think with data, it happens all the time. There's scope creep because you just find so many patterns in the data, and you're like, what do you attack first? I've worked a lot with clients now, and the ones start getting it, and they're like, okay, I can see this thing. I want 50 reports. So I typically have to ask them, is like, what is your biggest challenge right now today? Let's address that one first. Because you always hear that. It's like, well, what if you do this? What if you do this? What if you do this? And so I have to reel people in. It's like, hey, I can get you the most value. You just focus me, and we'll get there. So I get that all the time. I do want to revisit
Yeah.
the items that can derail a project, right? So we talked about here's an example of a derailment I went into. What's interesting is with Power BI, for example, you can take multiple sources now, and adding multiple sources adds a whole nother dimension and complexity to the problem. And what I've found is the example is somebody was using Google Sheets, and Google Sheets, you can change the field names and you can change the rows, and that's another thing is like, that data, it didn't say that number yesterday. Somebody went in and changed it, right?
Yeah.
So the data security integrity is kind of an issue. But I found that, with some of the other more robust databases, SQL servers and stuff, the field names, it's a little harder to change. It's a little more protected. But with Google Sheets, if a department was using that to track their stuff and they changed a field, if I was using that field inside of Power BI, it broke everything, right? Not just their report, how I was reporting off them, but all the other reports would just kind of cascade.
Which there's some data dependency that it's clicked in with, right?
So that could derail. So then you start thinking about, okay, now I got to take care of every department and educate them on how they're inputting their data, and they can't change the name of the fields because I'm referencing, and there's all these dependencies now that we're using this integrated system. So it gets your whole company to a more holistic view, but there's also an education piece. It's like, hey, you can derail this whole thing if you change that name and that number, right? So
yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, it sounds a little bit like you mentioned something in there about data integrity, and you know, it reminded me of when I'm working on AI and machine learning projects. Inevitably, when you're trying to forecast something that hasn't happened yet or classify something that hasn't been classified before,
yeah,
you get it wrong, right? And the model doesn't do what you expect it to do. And one of the challenges that a lot of companies have when they first start deploying these sort of models, I'm assuming it's quite true with Power BI models, is when something goes wrong, having the backups and the organization methods to keep track of versions of data sets, even if it's just small pieces of them or what have you, to be able to back reference and figure out what went wrong. Because sometimes when things go wrong, people go in and change the data on you because they're trying to fix the problem. But if you don't have that snapshot of where things were when they went wrong, the whole problem could be masked, and then you're going to be banging your head against the wall wondering what really happened, because now everything's working again, right?
yeah.
And it seems to me that a lot of times when people are working on these data projects, they're often confused as like software projects, right? People expect bugs, they expect there to be iteration and a life cycle of developing custom software. But working with data is, at least in my opinion, a whole different animal in that, in that, you've got versions of data as opposed to just versions of code and logic. You've got versions of data that's interacting with those versions of code. And that's like a whole nother dimension of complexity that, yeah, can be really challenging for a business to handle if you're not used to handling those sorts of challenges. But there's really simple techniques like data set revisioning and taking snapshots of your database that can give you more tools in order to track down those issues.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. If we had some backup and some versioning, we could quickly go back on that one example, the Google Sheets. And that brings me up to another point, which is, that reminds me, and that was my son. He needed a piece of paper. So, during these times, you get people coming in and that's the beauty of live streams we were talking about. It's like,
you get the whole experience when you join us live. Not just a polished podcast.
Yeah, and we were talking, you might get dropouts too, right? If Tess is live streaming, or one of my boys is live streaming or Minecrafting or whatever they do. One of us could drop out and drop back in. So be aware of that.
It's going to turn into the Charles Show.
Yeah, I'll be like, Andrew's gone. What do I do now? So, yeah, no, it could be fun. Where was I going again? So we were talking about
data set revisioning and stuff, and you mentioned Google Sheets, but I think you were going to go down a different path. So sorry, I can't help you.
Lost my train of thought. The beauty of live shows. And if anybody out there has a question for me, now's the time, because I'm at the awkward moment when I can't figure out what I was talking about.
Yeah, but again, that's the beauty of live stream, being able to jump right into these things is, we can take questions at any time. And honestly, if you're out there and you're thinking stuff in your head, you got stuff you want to say, the other advantage of having this sort of live stream is we can shoot over a link to you and you can join us with your webcam and just hop right on the show, even though it wasn't planned. And I don't know about you, Charles, but that's actually how I got into live streaming. I watched Charles do a LinkedIn Live, and I thought it was really cool what he was talking about with data. And I just kind of shot a comment, and almost without him even responding to me, he just sent me a link and said, join me. And I was like, I don't know if I want to jump on camera. That seems really, personal. I'm not ready for it, and just kind of made me quite nervous, but I still clicked the link and jumped on in. And now, as you can see, I may appear comfortable, but it's always a nerve-wracking experience every time you hit the go live button and you're like, all right, there's going to be people listening. Better have something useful to say.
It's Andrew, oh my God. I think we should talk about this, because there's the data revolution. And then there's this live video revolution, right? And we were a little bit before the show. Not everybody, it's not for everyone. That's I'll probably put that out there right now, because it's kind of an entertainment, it's education, you got to be comfortable with just putting yourself out there and just talking. And some people aren't going to like your thoughts too. So I remember the first thumbs down I got on my YouTube. I was like, oh man, I was so bummed. But now I get them all the time, and I'm like, okay, there's some people that don't like it, but they take the time to actually push that button, right? I was like, I actually appreciate that, because maybe there's something I could learn about it. But let's talk about live video real quick for the people that are out there that are getting into data. Both Andrew and I saw this, and I think Andrew has a good perspective, because his wife, Deos, they're owners of a ballet company, and they perform the arts. And one of the things I love about the arts is you are taking a piece of yourself, putting yourself out there, and it's your creation, right? And that's how these live streams are, is you're putting yourself out there, and it's also interactive in that, with any other YouTube video that's polished or anything you've practiced, a presentation on stage, a lot of that interaction is gone, right? You can't really have the audience, like Nick earlier just sent in a question, or we're feeding off each other, right? And this is on the fly as we go. We're trying to generate as much value for the audience as we can, and hopefully entertain a little bit. But live is so different from anything else I've ever experienced, and I enjoy it so much. I actually go to YouTube now, Andrew. I don't know if, but I find live shows that have been pre-recorded, and I watch them again 2 times, because that interaction, a lot of the questions are questions I would ask. it's kind of like having Google search and then having other people involved while you're Google searching. It's like, hey, I'm going to search data hoarding. And then, you're watching my search and you're like, well, what about data hoarding and silos and automotive or something? It's kind of like that. It's like you get to search for content and material, but then other people are adding to it, adding content, which, then you're expanding how you search this, right? So that's how live video is for me. It's ever expanding on the content, and it's
Yeah.
authentic you too, right? And I hope we get to the part where we talk a little bit about ourselves too. We were going to do that.
You can talk about yourself anytime you want, Charles.
Okay. I feel like I've been doing that a lot, so maybe we'll jump to you. How about so?
Yeah, I am a little bit newer to the live video bandwagon. I shouldn't maybe even call it a bandwagon because, like you said, it's transformational. One of the things that I love about it is for just content generation. At the beginning of this year, I started my own consultancy in artificial intelligence and machine learning. And I sat down at my desk and I tried to come up with what I thought was valuable content and posts and things of that nature for the relevant audience. People would potentially hire me. And
Yeah.
I am so freaking slow at doing that. And
Mm.
it's really hard
Yeah.
to, without having people you're talking to know what they need.
Yeah.
And starting those conversations is really challenging because you can jump on LinkedIn messages and start direct messaging people. But, that's what everybody does. And it's so business and text only and just not personable. And I've always felt that I've done better if I could stand in front of somebody and talk to them. And so LinkedIn Live, even though I get very nervous every time I jump onto a live stream, it only takes a couple of minutes before, especially if you bring on a trusted friend like Charles, it becomes a lot easier to just have a conversation with people like you normally would at the water cooler or your friend at work that you bounce crazy ideas off of. And being able to take that and chop it up or just leave it as is out there and basically make it available for people to interact with, that sort of feedback, not only from like a sales perspective of like helping me run my business, but it's a whole lot more enjoyable too to make content that way because I sit in my basement office here trying to come up with the PDF that's going to blow people's minds and go, oh man, this guy knows his stuff. I got to hire him, right? But that's no fun doing that all day. I'd much rather jump on with people who are doing this and not only like have a conversation that's valuable to potential clients, whether they hire me or not, but every single time I'm learning a lot and establishing connections that, separate from business, just at a personal level, are just so much fun to have, especially when we're quite frequently cooped up with
Yeah.
COVID. So it's kind of like satisfying both the personal connection as well as being this fantastic tool, at least for me, to be able to connect out there with content without sitting in my dungeon basement. So
Yeah. No. Wow. Yeah, that's a great point. During these times when you aren't connecting with people, you can join chats, you can interact with people, and then you can watch two people interact. And I think one of the biggest things is, I was reading somewhere that the brain, 70% is used for visual processing, some crazy amount of our brain, the human brain is for visual processing. And I think there's a lot of, the body language, right? People's micro expressions and stuff, and I love that. It's like, I've gotten on these live shows and I tell a joke and it just lands with a thud, right? With the two other people in the, on the show with me. And I'm like, okay, that joke not working, right? But if I was recording a video, I wouldn't get that feedback. And I think that is fundamentally one of the most important things about these live shows is you get feedback from the other person right away. And I absolutely, don't like just sitting in front and writing a script and then looking into the camera,
Yeah.
and trying to read the script and then record it and then post it, because I don't get that feedback from you. I don't know that you are getting value out of this. I don't know if there's comments. I don't know anything, right? And that I'll never know. But with the live show, like, you're kind of smiling, so I must be doing okay with my jokes. So
I'm like,
yeah, you're liking the jokes. So hopefully somebody else out there, if you like my jokes, maybe comment, let me know, keep going or stop.
and then eventually Charles will start a stand-up routine on his live channel.
Right.
I've joked with Tess that one of these days I would like to just try stand-up comedy. I know I would be horrendous at it, but it's one of those things that I feel like if I maybe practice enough on live streaming, kind of collect up a dozen jokes or whatnot, and then find the right audience, I might not be heartbroken at the end. But
you should niche and target Python, scripters, write jokes for those. There you go.
I do have a confession to make that I have actually started the process of that. So we are so off topic. I've got a couple of questions in this that we need to get back to, but
Sure. Okay.
Live stream digressions.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
Yeah.
So in college, my best friend and I, we would take popular songs and we would rewrite the lyrics and we would record ourselves singing them. And our ability to sing is not something that you really want to listen to for too long, but if it's entertaining content, it's worth listening to. And so we would do it for people who were like having a bad day, like our RA when she was having a bad week or something like that. And we'd just do some of them for fun. And I thought, I don't think anybody on LinkedIn would be interested in it, but I'm going to start just planning it anyways. If I can be the Weird Al of data, I'll take popular songs and make them into data songs, because I do this constantly throughout the day. You can ask my wife. It's not always topics that she prefers that I talk about in my songs, but I'm constantly changing the lyrics to songs to say really, really funny things. At least I think they're funny. So
you just did this, right? The other day, didn't you? Did you write something? Or no, not yet.
Well, I have written it. All right, so okay. I'll tell you what the song is, because maybe I can get some feedback right here. And while I'm pulling it up, I'm going to bring up a comment that came in about jokes. So, did you hear the one about the bacon cheeseburger who couldn't stop telling jokes? It was on a roll. Love it.
See, those are my kind of jokes. Thank you, Jason, for that.
Much appreciated. Yeah. So yeah, I don't know if you're a Jason Derulo fan. I can't really sing like him, but he's got a popular song right now called "Take You Dancin'," and the chorus I thought could be rewritten instead of. I'll just quick read a couple lines of the chorus. "Let me take you dancing, two-step to the bedroom." I mean, it's a Jason Derulo song, so it's that kind of theme. I was gonna change it into something like, "Let me clean your data, then extract some features, build a bunch of models, then we'll pick the best one. Let me use your data, data. We'll see."
Oh, see? And this is the beauty of live streams. You can be you, and really nobody would have known this except for Tess and your friends back in college. But now it's out there, and people watching this are like, "Oh, I've always wanted to do that. I'm going to watch your show to get the next meme." So
okay, so if you've made it to this point in the live stream, you are committed enough that you must send me some feedback as to whether you would listen to that song if I produced it. I didn't give you much to go on, but we're about 50 minutes into the live stream, so you're invested enough. You should at least send me some feedback.
So yeah, just real quick about, I want to talk about, so I've done a lot of stuff like the 3D printing initiative. I was doing face shields, visors, and I've got a group of people. And and I'm doing this Power BI stuff, and I also teach Lego League teams, right? STEM clubs, and I try to get 3D printers into schools. I try to help schools buy 3D printers. And Avi Singh is my mentor online, and he asked me the other day, it's like, Charles, who are you? Like, what is this common theme about all these things you're doing? And I thought about it, and I think I answered the question. This was just yesterday, and I was like, I really think like stuff like the STEM and the face shields is, I'm trying to plant the seeds to help other people get better, right?
Mm,
I love how compounding interest works. I've studied that. I loved how education, if you give somebody knowledge of something, they can take it and go apply it. And I'm hoping one day that I inspire the next, Albert Einstein, or the next, Dean Kamen, or whoever, right? If I can help them at this young age, and they can look back, it's like, man, Mr. Elwood showed me something really cool, or help somebody with Power BI. That's why I love Power BI so much, is, it's something that I can give to a company where they can just take it and grow and become, enormous, and really perform better, right? So I just want to leave that out there, because I think I've finally figured out what I'm all about. Right? It took me a while. 40 years, but I think that's what I'm all about. I'm just built to plant these seeds and help people grow. And and we'll get back to the BI and the data stuff, but hopefully this show, we plant enough seeds for people to go out there, download Power BI, or go out there, grab Python, download, start some writing your own scripts,
yeah.
or get people started on this, the data journey. We've seen it, we know it's there, right? We know it's coming. How do we get people started? How do we get them over that first wall? And how do we make a quick win for them so they can start down this path?
Yeah, and to your point, you had mentioned some of my previous conversations I've put on live streams about Python, and to me, Python is like the lowest barrier to entry programming tool that gives you plenty of packages and a community around it to give you access to the largest database in the world, the internet,
Yeah.
right? Like there is so much data out there on the internet that is really easy with a little bit of practice to scrape that information. So basically just taking information straight off of a series of web pages and making it into something interesting. Some of the companies I've worked with, that's actually a primary source of their information is web
Yeah.
scraping. And it's incredible to me how much value can be derived out of that. And with how accessible all these tools are, yeah, it's just an incredible opportunity for people who, you know, have a little bit of a mindset for asking questions when you're presented with data and information to make something really, really cool.
Yeah. Ooh, Andrew, before we go
Yeah.
there, if somebody out there is starting from scratch, like me in Python, so what can I do in like 10 minutes? What website, what data set, what can I download? What can I get started on, so that within the next 10 minutes, I can create a small, quick win in Python that will lead me to to progress and take it further, right? Do you
Yeah.
have like here's 4 steps, go do this and this, and then somebody in the audience can go run and do that, and maybe next show they can come back, it's like, hey, that didn't work, or that worked.
Yeah. So, I mean, it kind of depends. So, it depends on your interest. And I am trying to recall who said this the other day. Oh, one of the people in my LinkedIn network, David Knickerbocker, he was talking to me about, it's great that we have all these things that are accessible and people are interested in using these tools. But a lot of
Yeah.
people, they just start using the tools and follow tutorials, which there's nothing wrong against tutorials, but a
Yep.
lot of them are like on canned data sets, like standard data sets and things of that nature. And so you got to pick something that you're passionate about,
Yep.
that you will ask further questions of, as opposed to running through a checklist and saying, look, I can do this, right? So I have done a little bit of web scraping and I've wanted to do more. And so, with the professional ballet company that my wife and I own, I've
Yep.
thought about using Twitter to scrape Twitter to find out who's following who's talking about ballet. There is so much content in just picking a topic and maybe even just going to Twitter and trying to
Yep.
figure out who's talking about that topic and what are they saying. Because
Yep.
through that, you'll end up going through, you got to authenticate unless you're going to do it through their API.
Yep.
And you have to figure out a little bit of how are you going to organize this data. And then you
Yep.
have to figure out, okay, how do I traverse through this person follows this person follows this person? And it can get complicated really fast, but that's a
Yep.
really interesting way to just figure out, like, maybe you pick a couple of keywords and figure out how many tweets have those keywords exactly, right? And you could run that scraper once a week or something like that and see kind of like those Google trend plots. Maybe you can make a
Yeah.
Google trend plot of terms or keywords that are important to you and
Interesting.
see
Yeah.
if there's something there. Like maybe you've got an interesting business idea, right? I wouldn't
Yeah.
advocate, typing your business ideas into Google, but you can scrape Twitter and analyze those keywords and see if anybody's connecting up those concepts.
Right.
So,
Right. No, that's a great one. And I just want to add, the reason I got into Power BI and one of the data sets I got started in was I was scraping Indeed job descriptions.
mm,
And I was looking and I was bringing them into Power BI and I was looking for keywords. So if you were trying to hire a business intelligence analyst or a data analyst, what were companies searching for, right? So I was like, I just kept downloading the data, putting it in Power BI and putting in the words, the keywords. And I found this cool data set. It's like, oh, well, if I was a company today and I was searching for data analyst, I would search for SQL, dashboard, report, DAX, or it just gave me a list of the skills I should go after, right? So it was applicable to me and it was really interesting. And I used Power BI to search for something that would add value to me. So no, that's a great
yeah.
tip. I'm
And
going to
that's
start
what
Twitter.
you were saying there too with the resume stuff. I mean, so often resumes are first evaluated by machine. I would say by pretty poorly constructed uh, algorithms in the machine. But knowing what keywords you need to have on your resume. Now, don't
Yeah,
just throw keywords on your resume to get through the first loops, but like it can give you guidance into skill sets that you need. I mean,
yeah,
if you look at a lot of machine learning or data science projects or requisitions, one of the skill sets that they very, very frequently list that I did not have a couple of years ago was SQL.
yeah, yeah.
So I spent significant time on my free time to just get the basics down so that way I knew a little bit more what a left join was and how to do nested queries and stuff like that. So, yeah, it can be a super helpful guide, even for your own studies, to just not only learn some Twitter or some Python, but use it to scrape some info and figure out what you need to do next.
And get a job. Yeah. Did you
Yeah.
ever think this live stream would go into job advice?
Honestly, I thought there was a chance. I did a
Oh,
lot
yeah.
of, well, not maybe this particular live stream, but I
Yeah.
figured with you and me talking, eventually we'd land on it because when I went to Michigan Tech up in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, I was part of one of my jobs was in career services. So I
Oh,
spent
yeah,
a
yeah.
lot of time reading resumes and my first my first jobs out of college, I got connected with the HR department and would go back to the career fairs and do I've got 10 seconds I'm going to spend reading your resume before I kind of put you into a bucket of yes or no, which sounds terrible, but you kind of have to do that. So like,
Yep.
yes. There's another thing. If you're in the STEM fields and you need somebody to look at your resume, I can do a few of them. Don't
Yeah.
don't send me a
We,
deluge.
well, we should probably do another show on career services and job finding. I think we have a
Yeah.
lot of content for that too. So I have a lot
So
of
do you mind
stories
if I
yeah. Go
go
ahead.
ahead? Go ahead.
You have a no,
Yeah,
go ahead.
I was gonna bring up one of the questions that came through. Another one from Nick. Thank you so much for
Oh,
all
okay.
your interaction here, Nick.
Yeah.
So, I've struggled with APIs that require paginated requests, handling that
Yeah.
in Power BI. I'm going to leave this one to you, Charles, since I'm a Power BI noob.
Yeah, so paginated reports, I've tried, but the way the licensing is structured, I believe I have to have a Power BI embedded SKU to work with the paginated reports. So I think you can download the app. There's a paginated report Power BI building tool. But I've actually never got to play with that, Nick. So maybe we can connect on LinkedIn. And I would love to. I'm starting to get some projects with on the Power BI embedded SKUs now. So I may be looking into paginated reports soon. But that is an area that I want to get into, but I haven't really delved into yet. So
Great.
oh, great question, Nick. So he's dealing with a lot of these mergers and
Yeah,
it's getting
I'm going to
derailed.
be
So,
sending him a message after this saying, "Hey, I feel like we should probably have you on this live
yeah.
stream. Probably have some battle scars to share and
Oh my
insights
gosh.
to provide."
Yeah, he's run into some of the bigger walls. Yeah, so that's more enterprise type stuff, and yeah, he's run into some bigger walls. It looks like.
Yeah, it's amazing how the problems that you run into change with scale, right?
Yeah,
So at the beginning of the show, you were talking about, can you just give me a small subset of your data, right? And how powerful that is for making those initial connections and like organizing the data model and getting people talking. But
yeah,
once you start feeding it more and more data, I'm kind of extrapolating here, so tell me if I'm going off the rails. But
yeah.
I imagine there's data refresh issues, like right, like how frequently are we going to be updating this data? And if you do it too often, it sounds like you'd want it as often as possible, but you're going to be hitting some servers pretty hard if you do that.
That's exactly right because you start with a small set, and then the one set I got into had 6 databases we were pulling in, and we were like, oh, we can refresh 8 times a day. You can schedule 8 times a day in Power BI service. So we're like, turn it on, and there was so much data from the 8 different databases that it took an hour to refresh, and we went from 9 to 5, right? And if you're refreshing, you can't go in and work on the data model.
Oh
So me and
man.
an intern we're working on this, and we're like, yeah, let's turn on this 8 times a day feature. Boom. And
Oh
it
no.
basically locked us out for 8 hours. And we're like, what's going on? Why can't we log the data model?
Yeah.
So scale is important. As you add those, the scale of the data that needs to get refreshed, and then the refreshing becomes an issue. So that's when you start scheduling like in the middle of the night so that it doesn't impact
Yeah.
what you need to do. Oh no,
Yeah.
that's a great point. Is as it grows, you and that Google Sheet, that was a database we added much later, and so
Mm,
we didn't see that issue until we added more and more, and then each database has its own little quirks and stuff. So yeah, as you
yeah.
scale and bring in more stuff, the complexity and the issues just grows.
And to make this somewhat topical, I don't know if you heard this news item, but something in the news about a COVID data set, its backbone being in Microsoft Excel, and it reaching its limit. I don't remember if it was the row or the columns, right? But
Yeah,
like there's the architecture that you're dealing with, the scale of the data really matters, and you got to apply the right tools to it. Not saying that they chose the wrong tool from the onset, because like who knew how big this thing was going to be. But
right.
yeah, once you reach certain levels of scale, some tools are going to break down and some approaches are going to break down. And there's also opportunity in being able to refactor this stuff and see if there's a different creative way to use it. But I've found the most frequent thing I've had to do as I scale up data sets is revalidation. So I don't know
Hmm.
how much that would play into like redoing your data model, but once you have your data model, or for machine learning, your data set that you're going to be doing your training on, you
Yeah,
run that stuff locally, you get some results, things are looking good. Now you go, I'm going to do the big run over the next, 6 hours. Um, you might get different results once you scale it up. And now you have to go back into your data set and ask yourself, is it because the particular sample that I grabbed had a different distribution than the rest of it? Like, did I get unlucky? Did I
Yeah.
have bias in how I picked my data? There's all these things that can happen as you scale up data that, you want to just write it off and say, well, there's iteration in the process. But that's at the most painful parts when people are looking from business value, when they aren't necessarily used to seeing things work at a small scale and then break at a large scale when it comes to software projects, which data
Yeah.
projects aren't always software projects, but they've got that as a tool set, which means they inherit some of the same problems.
No, that's definitely a good point. Yeah, you do scale and you find new issues, and I'd find that all the time because I build these lookup tables and then I'd remove the duplicates and think, oh, I've only got 5 categories, and then you pull in the real
No.
data set and it's enormous, right? Or there's data errors and you misspell something, it becomes its own category, right? And now you got to figure out how to group it back in. So there's a lot of that when. And the beauty of Power BI is you can start on a CSV and then connect the SQL or whatever server you want back in later. And as long as the fields and the columns and the data is in pretty good shape, it reconnects, right? You can just change the source. But there are times when, further down in your data set, you didn't realize everything was misspelled for a year, or change the name, or who knows what. So yeah, that always throws you off. So
Yeah, categorical data always makes me nervous just because you're always taking small subsets to test on, and there's always categories that you didn't see before. And in machine learning models too, when you one hot encode those, that can really increase the dimensionality of your data, which is not a great thing always. So
yep.
cool.
Yep.
Well, I think I don't know how much more time you have, Charles. There was one other topic here that came through the comments that I thought might be interesting to throw out there. It's kind of a two-part thing. I don't know if it's going to show this whole long thing. Oh, it looks like it does.
Yeah. Oh, Jason.
Yep.
It's not a joke this time. All right.
It's not a joke this time. So the
Right.
gist of it is essentially they've got some technology that can take voice direction on a website, and they capture transcripts of that conversation or that audio that you present. They don't keep the audio, and they're using AI to find intent and sentiment data. And the question he has associated with that is, how do you see this type of data helping companies better understand customers? So one of the questions I thought I'd ask you with this is, you've done a decent amount of work in Power BI with marketing firms, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And so there's all of these different information sources. I don't know which ones the marketing firms that you've been working with, but there's advertising spending, there's, impressions, there's clicks, there's all these things that you can track on your website that you almost have to like infer what is the customer trying to do, and you kind of structure your website in a way that makes the UX really easy.
Yeah.
But if people are willing to talk to a website, does that make all of that data somewhat irrelevant, or does it become kind of like an augmenter to what maybe you can just directly get their intent? I imagine this is a lot like the search bar, right? Whenever I'm on a new website and I know what I'm looking for, I type it into the search bar. That's almost the non-voice way of getting to the kind of data that he's talking about here. So have you seen that kind of data in the marketing firms that you're working with, and like, have you found it to be useful?
In terms of are people scraping and understanding intent, so there's kind of a commoditized, because of Google, because of YouTube, that you can go onto Google too. And we talked about this the other day. You can type in a word and it gives you what other people are searching for. And it gives you an idea, that Google's kind of done that work and said, okay, I'm inferring that this is the topic. And if I look through all my data sets, this is kind of what you're looking for, which is kind of what I did with the Indeed scraping. Is like, okay, what is that hiring manager's intent? What was his intent for his gatekeeper? So there's somebody at the front gates reviewing, or maybe there's machines these days that are looking for, you enter the keywords and they're the gatekeepers. So you're trying to infer intent. And what's interesting is some of the keywords and stuff, they're just stuffing in there to weed certain types of experiences out. So you got to go a level further even for intent. So I think back to the question of, I think you're asking, is there, or Jason, is there language? Is there search? Is there, how do you find intent of your clients? And I did an Amazon skill once, which was interesting because, and I worked at Johnson Controls too with natural language processing. And what was interesting, there's different levels of AI machine learning, I think, and the kind that was used on Amazon and on the natural language processing that I was familiar with, a human had to enter all the keywords and sentences and utterances. So it wasn't really true AI. It's like there's a person guessing, writing every single way you could say something and hope they didn't miss anything. They put it in this database. And then the natural language processing, all it really did was put that human's list together, put what the person said and said, if there's any combination over here, okay, I think their intent is go down this path. So they built the path out and stuff. So I think you can kind of see patterns. Maybe that's the key is, with natural language, you can kind of see if there's patterns in utterances. If, you go to, let's say you say a subset of Python people and you have them go type in a search or say certain questions, you can probably look for those and find a pattern. But then there has to be almost a human learning. Avi Singh says this a lot. There's kind of a human learning step. And this is maybe your point about the context, the domain knowledge, right?
Yeah.
There has to be somebody there kind of to give that machine some contextual evidence. And that's what I was doing with the utterances, is I was giving some context. But with that context, you can take like randomized patterns and really put meaning to them. So, without that domain knowledge, without that context, that data could go anywhere. But really, once you give it that context, then that Alexa skill becomes so much more important. Then your natural language processing will take you down the right path. So I don't know if that answered Jason's. Yeah. I think there's future to it. I think the missing part is really the domain knowledge and the context that a human gives to it to really match up with the machine learning and the AI and really, give value to that.
Yeah, and I think we could do a whole show talking about this interaction between people and AI tools or Power BI tools, like bringing in this domain knowledge, because part of why it's seeing so much growth is the tools are making it easier for non-technical people to apply their domain knowledge to the data. So the very first thing that pops in my brain is AutoML, right? So auto machine learning. You literally can take a spreadsheet that you export from, Excel or something, upload it to one of your favorite cloud providers and say, this column right here are the answers. If I give you all the other columns, I want you to come up with what the answer should be in this column for future data that I give you. And they almost make it a couple clicks to deploy that model after it's been trained, so that way you could use it in an API and almost give it to a developer and say, do this, right? So that domain knowledge is you putting together that spreadsheet in a reasonable way. And so, all of these tools are making this stuff easier and easier, but there's always this component of domain knowledge, giving the AI context that sure, there's going to be applications in the future where that domain knowledge is baked into the model or the process. But it's going to be faster when humans provide that. And so viewing these technologies as augmenters as opposed to replacers, or, just straight up efficiency machines, you can do so many more positive things in your business by not just saying we've got data, let's turn it into insights, but saying how
Yeah.
do we use this data to give our staff, our employees superpowers, right? How do we
Yeah.
make their lives easier and more effective? That's where at least where I'm finding the most success in applying these sort of processes. So
We're getting deep into it now, but this is probably the most critical point of this hour, that we've had,
save it for the
is
end.
yeah, the domain knowledge, the knowledge, what you can get out of it. And the story is, I had an intern once come to me and it's like, Charles, I can write all the DAX and I can write all the M code and the Python and whatever, but I get these results and these visualizations and they mean nothing to me. Right. And so that's when I realized, it was my domain knowledge from years in industry that really was the missing piece in the puzzle. Is you can get it to a certain point, but then to turn it into real value and profits and save time, that's where my 30 years of industry experience bridged that gap. And it did it so fast. Like, the interns would have to study and they have to learn the process and stuff, but I already knew them. Right. So and like you said, it's bridging that gap now. It's bringing the business people that have this domain knowledge, and it's giving those tools to them so that not only that can they shorten the time to get to the insights, but they can translate it into something so valuable, which is savings in time, profits, productivity, all these things. But that last little piece is where our experience fits in, and we can help people out. And you need a little bit of that to make it go faster. AI can probably find it at, if you really know, but if you just augment it a little bit, boy, it just blows it up. It's exponential at that point. So yeah, really important point. I'm glad you phrased it so nicely too. I like that.
Oh, thanks, Charles. Cool. Well,
Yeah.
I think we'll probably call the show here. It's
Yeah.
been a fantastic time talking with you, Charles.
Yeah.
As always, so many cool, relevant stories from your extensive work with this stuff. So glad you were able to join. And yeah, I guess until next time, I'm sure we'll be live streaming together again soon.
Yeah. Sounds good. We're gonna do a recap?
Yep, we'll recap right afterwards. Thanks everybody who is online listening. Hopefully you got something valuable out of it. All right, take care.